Hello and welcome to Pale Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most trim work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are back to talk about Cutting Class 6.Z, and then we jump into the new arc. We have gone ahead 7.1 and no bonus material this week because it's Christmas. Why not? Before we get into that, though, a quick reminder, we're running a fan art contest currently. The theme is The Power of the Holidays, and you have until the 4th of January to get your submissions in. Just under a month.
So send us your holiday-themed Wildbow fan art by the 4th.
Yeah. Let's dive into it, shall we? Cutting Class 6.Z, we are in an interlude. We are in a new character's head, and it's Fernanda. Interesting. Did you pick Fernanda as an interlude character? I mean, no. You picked what, Sig, and I picked Alexander, I think.
I was with the brownies.
Oh, that's right. You were keen on brownie interlude.
Which, technically could have been brownies watching Fernanda the whole time. You don't know.
I mean, for all you know, it could be the brownies watching everyone for this entire story the whole time.
This whole thing was a brownie POV.
But yeah, we're in Fernanda's head. We are back before everything went down at the school. We're kind of watching it happening. We've dived into Fernanda's head as Chase comes to check in on her before a big meeting with Alex and the other Bélangers.
Well, so
Fernanda's an interesting one.
Yeah, well, so it's like Saturday afternoon, which is like a day or so into Lucy's 3-day hiatus from the world.
Yeah. So obviously we knew we were going to jump back. I think we all kind of knew we were going to jump back and see how everything went down. And we see, I think, the main blow that is dealt, which is the Bélanger apprentices. But let's start by talking about Fernanda a bit. She's an interesting little 13-year-old, isn't she?
My first and second read of this chapter were just so different because I think for the first one, I kept trying to make myself believe that there was a human being underneath. And then it was really the second time through, I think I'd lost that hope, and I just really was hit by how calculating Fernanda is. And I think the chapter does a really, really good job of introducing us to this right at the start. Like, everything Fernanda does is so calculated. Like, the way she holds herself, I think she bounces, tactically when Chase calls her. She opens the conversation in just, a very normal sibling way to do, which is asking if their parents are still alive. She's concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very concerned. I want to read this quote because I put it out as well. Basically, the first thing she says when she sees Chase is, "Did our father die?" she asked. No. Mum, then? Which is just... I mean, it immediately sets up the dynamic between these two siblings, right? It's so unfamiliar.
Well, and not just that, it sets up the whole family as well, because there's no emotion behind asking if her parents have died either. She just, it's just that's the only thing that she could think of that would be big enough that he would bother doing this.
Yeah, it's such a sign that they just don't interact because this is the only reason for them to be interacting is a dead parent.
Yeah. We're diving straight into a practitioner point of view. So we really open with this reminder that, hey, these people and their family dynamics are fucked.
Yep.
I mean, Fernanda as a point of view choice, I think is really, really interesting because she's such an interesting comparison to the Kennetiers. Obviously, she's the same age as them. So she's sort of ripe for comparisons against them. But I mean, I guess she's kind of this weird or antithesis of Lucy in that she's suffered all of this sort of I don't know, oppression at the hands of this system, and has just turned it completely in and sociopathically, selfishly sort of started manipulating everyone around her, as opposed to Lucy, who just challenges when people are being shitty. Fernanda just sort of projects that back out onto the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I love your point that Fernanda is kind of a reflection of the characters, because you're right. I hadn't really connected it, but it's another example of a 13-year-old in this story who is forced by the horrific situations around them to be a lot more mature. And I think that's a really fun beat to set up Fernanda as presumably someone who's going to be on the other side to our Kennetiers, as we'll find out over the course of this chapter and the next one. Yeah, just setting up more kind of, I guess, pale reflections is the term for them, that we can use to dive in and explore these dynamics a bit more.
Yeah, yeah. Especially because I don't know. Maybe we'll get to this at the end of the chapter, but like, I'm curious to hear people's thoughts on how much they're rooting for Fernanda by the end of the chapter.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Um, yeah, I think the other thing to touch on here is just the relationship between Chase and Fernanda, which is just so cold.
Hmm.
And a bit that's Fernanda's fault, but clearly, Chase is trying to bridge the gap a bit in this first conversation, and it's clear that this has just so not been the norm. Like the norm for them has just been complete, almost indifference, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, just cold.
yeah. Cold's the right word for it. Basically estranged from the sounds of it, or barely acquaintances. I love the twist that we're going to get to that sort of recontextualizes Chase's like attempts to rekindle some sort of regular relationship with Fernanda. But it's I guess we'll keep getting into it, but it's just like Fernanda's just having none of it,
Mm.
and I can't blame her for that.
Mm, yeah. Um, yeah, I guess we'll get into that more as this conversation continues, because Fernanda and Chase continue to chit chat and kind of catch up as best as they can, I guess. And Fernanda tells Chase what she's been up to and kind of reminds him how uh, privileged he is in comparison to her in their family.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, like again, we've sort of talked about how distant they are, but like it, this segment really hammers home just how little Chase knows about Fernanda. Um, and like there's all this stuff like she kind of begrudgingly admits that she's proud of him, and it like disgusts her
Mm,
to think of this. And I remember, like, again, the first time I read this, I thought there was like this undercurrent of, oh, she's so used to faking emotions, she doesn't realize she has, genuine sibling love for Chase. And then,
mm.
um, by the end of the chapter, I realized that was not the correct read.
Yeah,
She-
it's not. It's weird. It's kind of halfway between having a moment of affection and not. Like her reaction to everything like this is to she almost has these stabs of regular emotion, but you can tell they're not quite getting the last mile to turning into any actual emotion, right?
I see. I don't even know if she is coming close. Like, I think
Mm,
with Chase specifically, I think
right.
Layla's maybe a different story, and
Yeah.
we will get there. But I think with Chase, she's just genuinely disgusted by him and their family, and doesn't feel anything for them. And I can't really blame her. Um, like the whole framing of all this stuff around her and her relationship with the family is her as an asset.
Mm,
And it's like the only kind words she's ever gotten from her father that she can remember is him saying she would be a valuable asset for the family.
yes.
Um, yeah, it's like you can see, and I think this is what I love about Wildbow interludes is like she's sort of turned out to be a bit of a monster, but I can see how she got there, and I really struggle to blame her for it.
Yeah, you can't blame her at all, can you? Right? Like we get these bits about how she's obsessed with. I think it's Louisa, who's one of her cousins, who basically didn't prove herself enough to the family, and then was just married off as a result of that. And so Fernanda's entire life is kind of a bid to prove herself that she can be an independent, powerful asset to the family, essentially, so that she doesn't have to be put into this situation of being married off as the kind of fallback plan for them.
Yeah, which is it's just obviously so incredibly fucked up. And we've criticized practitioners a lot for how terribly they treat others like objects and stuff, but I guess credit where it's due, they're equal opportunity terrible people because they're doing it to their own.
Mm. Yeah, maybe they're great parents as well because we get a bit where Fernanda's dad gives her a unicorn ride, which is great. So yeah, maybe they're great. Maybe they're good parents, and we don't know.
I mean, that is a pretty kick-ass reward for like a 4-year-old to get a unicorn ride.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
you know, she got it for being emotionally manipulative, so not great parenting, but I
Mm,
suppose in Fernanda's case, you'll take what you can get.
Yeah. Yeah, not maybe not great parenting, but also it's a unicorn, so I think it's fine. Um,
Yeah. I think it's funny as well, like, Fernanda talks about how, her whole thing is kind of emotional manipulation. Specifically, she sort of picks targets and wins them over, and everyone else kind of hates her for it, but, it works for her, and it just sort of recontextualizes a bit how she was introduced as, like, she was, like, the loud, spoilt brat in,
mm,
I think it was, like, late Arc 4 where she was first introduced.
mm.
And at least partially, it was like a mask she was wearing because she's actually a much more cold, evil person than she came across as in those chapters.
Yeah, which again, I guess raises the question: why is it that seeming like a popular queen bee type is the benefit to her with the Kenneteers?
What do you mean?
Well, we saw her. So when we first saw her, she was being this popular queen bee type, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And through the course of this chapter, we learn that she puts on these different mannerisms based on what she thinks will be advantageous to her. So why was that the mannerism that she thought would be advantageous to her with the Kenneteers? Or was it just that that's what she was? That's the mode she was in when she was around other people, and the Kenneteers just kind of stumbled across it. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's just the mode she leans into in the
Mm,
school. And like she talks about substitute teacher shit stirring, which is kind of what Grobard was at the time.
yes, yes,
So I think the Canneteers probably just didn't factor into the decision to be that character at the time.
yep. Maybe that's right. Also, she is again only 13, so she's not yet at that stage of being a maniacal, devious mastermind.
No, but she's doing her darndest to get there.
She's
Like,
definitely doing solid, but she's not yet. I get the sense she's not yet there.
I mean, I guess I look at anyone who's 13 as somewhat redeemable because
Mm,
you're still about to go through like the back half of your most formative part of your life. So it's like there's still time to turn it around.
mm,
Um, I don't know. I mean, like, the other interesting thing I quickly want to talk about before we get further into a conversation with Chase is Fernanda's practice or almost lack thereof.
mm,
Like, she doesn't actually and I think this ties into her sort of position in the family. She doesn't actually really get to do any magic in this chapter. Like,
mm.
I'm kind of confused as to what her practice looks like. She, at best, uses her sight to discern some basic connections to, like, throw some clothes in the water, um, which kind of feels like practitioner 101ing. Like, I don't
Yeah.
it's interesting how she's actually kind of built up this whole emotional manipulation shtick, kind of just through mundane, like, social manipulation. There doesn't actually seem to be magical stuff going on.
Yeah, you're right. We don't get a clear picture on what her magic actively actually looks like, right? I mean, to the best we can guess, it's just her using her magic to augment her kind of natural ability to sense, weaknesses and pressure points and play into relationships, right? But we don't really see her do any magic, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, well, she asks Layla for essentially basic practice lessons.
Mm,
So I almost get the impression that she's been awakened by her family, sort of obligatory style, and they haven't
yeah,
actually given her any tools or anything apart from sending her to this school, which she maybe only got in because Chase did. Uh,
yeah,
so yeah, I don't know. I actually kind of almost feel like she probably doesn't really have any practice, and it's kind of more impressive and scary that really she's been labeled as like an emotionally manipulative practitioner just solely based on her like raw social manipulation skills. Like
mm,
she hasn't even got magic in there yet.
mm. Yeah, you're right. I I wonder what she could turn into with magic then.
Yeah, probably pretty something pretty fucking scary. I bet.
Yes, true. Um, so yeah, Chase kind of reveals why he has started chatting to Fernanda here. Uh, he's lost and he needs some help from someone that he can trust. He's kind of looking for a pal.
Yeah, and obviously this gets recontextualized a bit more later, but like this is where a- as much as he's the worst, you kind of start to feel a little bit sorry for Chase here too. Like obviously you put him and Fernanda side by side and it's kind of no question who you feel sorry for more, but he's still like not a victim, but he's so alone and lost, and the way all this bullshit works, he doesn't have anyone he can turn to. Like, it's a very different problem. Obviously, it's kind of like this weird suffering from success sort of deal, but like he's still suffering.
Mm, yeah.
I guess just there's no winners in these
No,
situations.
yeah. I mean, it's an interlude, right, Elliot? So of course we wouldn't get through without Wildbow attempting to redeem some characters in our eyes. And we don't fully get there because Chase is still a piece of shit, but I kind of definitely start to sympathize with him more than I used to.
Yeah, and like, God, heaven forbid, even Seth. Like, I guess we'll get there, but it's a different ball game with them. But like, I feel for them a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah, I put out these lines where Chase makes an attempt to bridge the gap between himself and Fernanda, and she thinks he wanted so badly to close this divide. Fine, she'd use that. She'd step back, forcing him to extend further to reach out. It's heartbreaking, right? Like, she knows he is trying to be a brother or build a sibling relationship, and it's just like, nope. Let's, let's turn that into an advantage.
Yeah, like the two big things that jumped out to me about Fernanda in this chapter was how much she focuses on like her own body language and positioning and poise, and how much she thinks of everything as transactional. And that's like her doing both of those right now. There's like she notices, oh, Chase genuinely wants to connect to me. And her response is, okay, well, I'm going to change my positioning to like increase my end of this transaction, which is just like, wow, like she is so far gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Fully fully in manipulation mode. There's not even a moment of like, should I consider this? She just immediately thinks about how to use it.
Yeah, like, it never crosses her mind. Like, there's actually one bit where, um, I think she calls Chase like Mister Head of the family,
Mm,
and then he gets really upset, and she thinks to herself, she wasn't sure why it bothered him so much when she said that, but she filed it away. And so it's kind of like she's literally not even capable of figuring out why it hurts Chase that she refuses to connect with him emotionally. Like that's how far this gap is Fernanda has been so hurt by all this. You know, she's making Verona's home life look pretty ideal right now with like how messed up she has been by all of this. And then on the other hand, like Chase has just sort of fucked around and wasted his privilege and kind of has no idea why this divide is so big.
mm. Um, yeah. I mean, it's surely Chase knows this divide must be as big as it is, right? Like you don't get the impression he has done too much to bridge the gap before literally today.
Yeah, but I think he genuinely sort of thought of her as his sister and he didn't realize how bad she had it. Like he thought he had it bad. So he was like, "Oh, I'll just try and reconnect and she'll want that too." And I don't think he realizes how much she hates his guts.
Yeah, I guess Chase doesn't realize how much most people hate his guts is probably a feature of his character, so it's
True.
consistent.
He maybe also just overestimated how many emotions Fernanda is capable of feeling.
Yeah, his emotional appeals clearly don't work.
I mean, it's
um,
kind of funny that the emotional manipulator almost has none. I
yeah,
suppose that comes with the territory.
yeah, kind of being an outsider to emotions lets us study them from that position, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, just that focus on manipulating them kind of turns inwards to the point where you manipulate them off on yourself so that they're not a factor.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Chase is kind of trying to get her to open up to him more and build more of that sibling relationship. And Fernanda drops a bit of a bombshell that she's been sitting on, which is a drunk confession conversation that Chase and Fernanda had last year.
I mean, ooh, like this is a very powerful moment. It's sort of like the climax of this whole conversation. Um, and like obviously the actual content, like what Chase said to her, is awful, and Fernanda kind of outlines it in such a way as to hurt him,
Mm,
maximally. But it's almost like what struck me more than that was the way Fernanda is telling, like again, like she's held on to this. She's waited for the perfect time to tell him. Like it's not just that what he said was awful, but like I'm heartbroken at the way Fernanda is like held onto it as a tool to use later.
mm, mm. Yeah. Clearly something that runs in the family, this vibe of like, here's something that I can drop at an opportune moment. I What is Fernanda trying to achieve here, do you think? Other than you get the impression that she's just trying to make sure that barrier between the two of them stays nice and intact. And this is a way to just kind of basically effectively slap him in the face a few times. Do you think there's anything else that she's up to here? I'm curious what her goal is because it's like, this is so juicy and she doesn't use it for any real major power play, right?
I think it's like a more subtle power play. Like it's about guilting Chase and putting him in the position where like she kind of has this karmic edge over him, sort of deal. Like
Mm,
he will for the next while now, while he's particularly vulnerable and while this meeting is about to come up, like will look to her a bit more because he's going to be trying to make it up to her. I think would be her plan. So it's sort of this is the time because this is the best time to have that on the top of his mind so that she can use it.
mm. Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Just a way to kind of elevate her status relative to him for a bit, especially because
Yeah.
this is a tumultuous time at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. Like if things in Alexander's domain had gone better, she might have had more situations where she could have used that guilt she was holding over Chase. But things kind of
Yeah,
get away from her there.
yeah, cool. Yeah, so I want to pull this out. Just a very silly moment when they finish up their conversation. I'll read it out. He looked up at the sun. 13 minutes, 20 seconds, he said, which is such a stupid power. The ability to tell the exact time by looking at the sun. But I love it. It's so Chase.
I didn't notice that was what he was doing, but I like that. Like because he doesn't he say later in the chapter he's not like he's not like a future seeing augur. He's like somebody who specializes in observing the present.
Yes.
So of course, I sort of think could extend to telling the time from the position of the sun.
Mm. Yeah, why wouldn't it? It's awesome. I mean, it's useless, but it's very showy. Um, So yeah, this conversation wraps up, and then Fernanda goes and picks up Layla from this skinny dipping session, and the two walk back and discuss friendship.
Yeah, and just a little side note before we get into that and those two.
Mm.
So one of the extra people that Layla had brought out here was Demarian Stein,
Hmm.
I guess it's pronounced Stain because Fernanda in all of the chapter s- misspells it like stain as in like food stain, whereas
Hmm.
it's spelled Steyn.
Yes.
But the only time in this chapter it's spelt correctly is when Layla says it, which is just this nice little touch that I think is Fernanda's disdain for uh Demarion like bleeding through.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. The fact that she calls him stain like a food stain is a great way of her just subtly undercutting him. That's, I imagine, how she spells it in her own head.
Yeah, well, I mean, we kind of have evidence for that because this is her chapter and that's how it's spelled. I mean, also just I guess like shout out. The reason I noticed that was because I was looking for all the characters who got introduced in the student guide. Because, like, yeah, just shout out to the student guide. That like best extra material ever. I use that shit so often, um, especially compared to all the others. Like, it's my favorite extra material just for amount of usage.
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it?
Like, yeah, I just especially because of the way characters come in and out, and there's so many in the school, it's so
Mm.
useful to just have a handy list.
Yeah, I've sometimes had trouble keeping track of, wait, which one is this? Is this one of the, the crazy people that work with like addiction and drugs? Oh no, wait, who's this again? Yeah, like
Yeah,
very
exactly.
useful
I may
for
not
helping me.
recognize the name, but if I like look someone up and it says "hot girl totem," I'm gonna be like, "Oh, it's that
Oh
nerd
yes, it's
kid
this one.
that
Yeah,
that they
exactly.
were that they were on the group project with, and they tapped out his power." Yeah.
Yep, yep.
But yeah, so back to I guess Layla and Fernanda's thing. Like this interaction to Layla was a different kind of heartbreak to me than the Chase one because I think she's actually on the verge of genuinely caring for Layla. Um and obviously that kind of gets dissolved at the end of the chapter.
Mm,
Um but it kind of feels like she actually is like she genuinely thinks of Layla as her actual best friend
mm,
and she still can't help. like doing this transactional stuff to like win the thing. Like she doesn't promise anything to Layla, but she gets a promise out of Layla for lessons, and she's kind of proud of that. And you're just like, oh, this is actually the person you care about the most, and you're still sort of shamelessly manipulating them and trying to win the interaction.
Yeah, it's sad, right? I got the sense from this that if they had had maybe 6 months or a year of more time of slowly building this friendship and having lessons together and etc., possibly Layla could have broken through this defensive shell to have a genuine friendship with Fernanda. But obviously, the shakeups around the BHI mean that that's never going to happen, which means that Fernanda is still going to be just locked away in her own emotionless box.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree. Like, I could see a path where maybe these two could actually form a genuine bond. But I guess, like
Mm,
everyone in this school says, it's actually very hard to do that. Usually, the only people you can trust is family, and we kind of seen that's its own kind of bullshit. Like, family's only going to stick by you as long as it helps the family.
mm.
It is just kind of more likely that you can stay on the path that will help the family than it is with like other friends. So like maybe not, honestly. Like maybe that's kind of the point. Maybe there's always bullshit like what's happening at the BHI that stops that from happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that's a part. I'm sure there's a like consistent drive for conflict to be built just so there's no unification of practitioners in this system, something like that, right? Like
Yeah.
the universe keeps conflict going so that things don't get too friendly between practitioners.
I don't think the universe does it. I think the practitioners handle it all on their
Sure,
own.
yeah, that's fair.
All
Universe
you
doesn't
need
need to
is
get
some
involved there.
Alexanders and Bristos. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, true. Um, so yeah, we skip ahead to this meeting of the Belangers with Fernanda getting a front row seat as Alexander's apprentices begin to stab him in the back in his face. Starting with Nicolette, and this is one we've been waiting for a while, and it finally comes in here, and it's fine. Alexander's totally chill about it.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. He's like, oh, maybe one day I'll get you back, and I think even all of his apprentices are like, yeah, but we know you.
Yeah.
I love how this sort of is set up with Fernanda actually seems to genuinely look up to Nicolette,
Mm,
and you can kind of see that connection because Nicolette was someone who was on the bottom, like she had nothing, and she has just through sheer force of being like good at stuff, worked her way up to being like a Belanger apprentice,
mm.
and so you can see how like from Fernanda's point of view, like this is someone to kind of idolize.
Yeah. Which I think Nicolette is a good role model for Fernanda.
Yeah,
So I approve. Good stuff.
yeah, I agree. Hopefully, some of the genuinely being a good person stuff that Nicolette does would wipe off on her as well.
Mm, yeah. Hopefully. um, I want to point out one other thing as Fernanda has a brief interaction with Alexander before the betrayals all start. He asks how she is, and she says, "Oh, I'm good, but I would be better if I had won that ticket," referencing when the Kennetiers kind of earned Alexander's favor a little bit unfairly over her. And there's this moment where Alexander kind of takes a bit of a brief respite from the worries of this situation and delivers a moment, slips a little bit back into teaching mode, and it's just like, oh man, Alexander, he really just is at home when he's delivering lessons, imparting lessons to people, right? Like he really just loves it.
Yeah, like he's at home when he's headmastering, basically. Uh yeah, I like that. Especially because obviously the way Alexander operates for the rest of this chapter, um, I struggle not to connect him and Fernando a bit. Like he's obviously held on to this previous transaction till the point where he can use it most effectively, which is kind of what Fernando just did with that conversation with Chase. So you can
Mm,
sort of see I think these two connect her a little bit because I wouldn't be surprised to learn that she's a bit of a baby Alexander.
mm, yeah, yeah, interesting. She
Like
kind of is, isn't she?
I think she Seth compares the or talks about like people with Alexander's drive later, and I think
Mm,
Fernanda is someone with Alexander's drive.
mm, mm, yeah, I can see it.
But yeah, I love as well how you feel the escalation in this scene because, um, like Fernanda has been so on top of everything. Like up until now, like she's been reading everyone's body language, kind of understanding the dynamics and being able to put herself in the right spot or whatever. And we get in here and she's completely lost. She's like, nobody's giving me anything to work off of. Like,
Mm,
I know they're tense, but I can't really read any more than that. Like, it sort of escalates things, I think, a bit subconsciously for you because Fernanda's suddenly lost, and the whole chapter before this has been setting up how good she is at reading people like this. So now that she's lost, you're sort of like, oh, this is like high level shit.
mm, yeah, interesting. Kind of escalates it a bit. Um, yeah, maybe just representing that there's so much. I mean, this chapter, this part of this chapter has so much stuff going on behind, like the revelation of all of these betrayals and basically effectively coup and claims coming to resolution. Right, that's the scene that we're seeing here, and I think it's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost easy to forget that Fernanda is the POV for half of this forswearing scene. Like, she gets so pushed to the sideline as all the big players move about that, like, like, apart from like reactions like Fernanda moving away from people or towards people, like, she's not even really a presence in the scene.
Mm, mm, yeah, she's she's small potatoes, so she probably doesn't have that much insight into what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like she's just sort of being left behind a bit. It's all this bullshit goes on the top, and like as well as Nicolette announces like her defection and everything. I love how Zed sort of refuses to stay uninvolved as Ray and Durashay are telling him to. Like he can't. It's like this obviously culminates in the fight he and Ray are having in the present. But I love how you start to see it already because I couldn't help but like support Zed as he's just like, "No, fuck you. I want to talk to my friend about why she's betraying us."
Mm, I mean, yeah, fair enough. It's pretty. I don't know. I guess I don't have a solid conception of what this betrayal tangibly means, in the sense that, like, I feel like this isn't. Nicolette says to Zed, "Hey, I'd like if we were still able to be friends," and Zed says, "Oh, I'm not sure if that's still going to be possible." My reaction to reading that is like, "Oh, isn't it?" Like, I don't know. Maybe it's just because Alexander's being so chill about it that this minimizes how much of a betrayal this is. But it seems pretty. It seems basically like Nicolette gets out about as much as all she's really doing is just like handing in her notice, right? Like, it feels like Nicolette is just handing in notice for a job, and it read to me kind of like a coworker saying, "Oh, I'd like us to stay friends," and the coworker saying, "Well, I don't know if we can," which is just a weird thing to say, right?
I think you're underestimating how not chill. I think Alexander is like not outwardly unchill, if that makes sense. Like he's not the person to yell and throw a tantrum. Well, he does a little bit later on, but
Mm,
I I think he's like that silent anger type of person. Um and that's sort of the read I've got. Like I'm pretty sure Nicolette wouldn't go within 100 meters of me if she could help it after this.
um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Alexander basically says to Nicolette, like, "I'm not going to take any immediate action against you. That obviously doesn't extend if you join a rival team and I have to take action against that team." That's basically what he's saying, right? I think
Yeah.
that's pretty fair. I think that's a pretty fair response.
I mean, yeah, but like just because you didn't murder someone for leaving you, that doesn't mean that it's all good, you know?
Mm,
Like there's a gap between all good and murder, and I think he's a fair way down that scale.
I don't know. I guess we'll see. I imagine we'll talk about this more once we get to the fourth defector.
Yeah, yeah.
So next up is Tanner, who again announces he is defecting. And Tanner doesn't get that much dive into because he's not really an important character. But it kind of sets up that if one more person defects, things are going to get problematic. And so Alexander asks Seth and Chase, "Are you defecting or not?" And Chase outlines the offer that he got.
Yes, and I wanted to read out part of a quote for that because he sort of says this to Fernanda, and he says, "So part of the deal is apprenticeships for every member of the Witt family.
Mm,
Fernanda, my cousins, the adults who want to learn. Also, a cure for a heart wrenching my aunt suffered when a practice backfired."
hmm
And Fernanda hears this and just immediately thinks, apprenticeships for everyone? No thought given to the aunt. Like, at all.
That's a good point. I didn't
Uh,
consider that, but she really doesn't give a shit about the art, huh?
like, yeah, like, I'll be first in line to give a lot of shit to Chase for a lot of the stuff he's done. At least he seems to genuinely care about people, which is just not something I can say for Fernanda at the end of this interlude. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, but I mean, like for me, this sort of seals the deal. The way that like Chase outlines this, and you're like, well, okay, like Fernanda's all aboard team defection now because her whole life has been defined by needing to get some sort of skill in the practice, so she's useful as an asset. And getting a legit apprenticeship would like seal that absolutely.
mm. Yeah, definitely will assist. And God, what an offer, right? Like it's so perfect. The way that this offer is so perfect and framed in the sense of this chapter is it's incredible.
Yeah, like, as a twist on recontextualizing the whole conversation that was the first half of this chapter, it's fantastic because 'cause you're suddenly like, "Oh, like, that's why Chase was attempting to be a big brother because he's done his readings and he knows that if he takes this deal, everyone's better off, but they lose what little concept of being a family they have." And so this was basically him giving Fernanda a chance to, like, prove that they could be a family, and I feel like her responses just sort of yeah, sealed it. She was like, "No, I don't want to be your sister." And so he was like, "Well, okay, like I'll do this for you." And it's surprisingly selfless of him. I mean,
Mm.
kind of it's still a little bit selfish because he doesn't want all the pressure or whatever the fuck. But yeah, like I don't know. It's such a good twist. It's this actually kind of beautiful moment from Chase. Like I loved it.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Like, oh, Chase gave this test to Fernanda of is there a chance that this family can be put back together, or at least the parts that he cares about? And she definitively gives the answer of nope. And so that's it. Chase has kind of had the decision made for him. There's no reason for him to worry about keeping the family together. Why not just let them all have their own little happier bits?
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, he made Fernanda make the decision. Like, she didn't know she was doing it, but she kind of made that decision for herself and for everyone. He gave her the power, and she didn't know.
Mm,
Um, it's such a great moment, and it's kind of tragic as well because, of course, in this world of practitioners, more success correlates with your family becoming less of a family. Um, sounds like they're already pretty fucking broken anyway, so um, not a huge loss, but like the fact that, there seems to be a direct correlation between how successful a family is and how disconnected they are from like being a close family.
mm, yeah. Um, I don't know. It's just sad. Like, going back and rereading the earlier conversation with the stuff with the thing in mind of Chase is measuring if this family is salvageable. It just makes it so sad, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like, because he's basically, it's kind of a little bit selfish because I think it's like everyone will be happier except him if he takes the offer. So there's
Mm,
that little bit of like, can I save the family for me? But I think there's also just this thing where he's like, is the family worth saving? And Fernanda
mm.
tells him no.
No, it's not. Yeah.
And
Oh,
he makes this decision. Anyway, there's even a moment where Fernanda tries to sort of get him to stop, and he's like, "No, I've made this decision, or you made this decision for us, and like I'm doing this for all of you.
yeah.
Like fuck it, I don't want this pressure anymore." Um, yeah. I mean, one last note that we sort of skipped over. So obviously, at this point, uh, three of them I think have decided to defect.
Mm,
Nicolette, Tanner, and Chase. Um, Seth is still TBD, and so the only person who ends up staying is Y. And I wanted to bring Y up just because in this chapter and in the next chapter, I think it's about 3 or 4 times we just get told, "Oh, Y is away and he's
mm.
busy, and he will continue to be away and busy." And it's just like,
Does
have
he
we been told
exist?
that? Well, no, have we been told that he's away and he's busy one too many times? What is this? Is this Alexander's secret weapon, or like I don't know. I guess
Mm.
I'm just blatantly tinfoiling here, but we got told very precisely that Y is away and is busy one too many times for me to be like, oh, Y's not going to come in and be relevant at all.
Yeah, what do you think is who do you think Y is? Why is he not in the story yet. What's going to happen when he comes back? Is it going to be like, um, he's maybe to do with Oni in some way? I mean, that's the running theme of that's what feels like the weird, not Deus Ex Machina, but kind of new element that is going to be introduced is going to be, right?
Yeah, well, he's the most loyal Belenjay, and he's also the one who, like, yeah, he's the one we know nothing about, and all we know is that he's the most loyal one, and we're never told what he's busy doing. Like, there's almost this implication of, oh, he's busy, and you assume, oh, he's doing business for the Belenjay Circle, but like he could just be preparing some weird shit somewhere, like to fight for the Blue Heron Institute. Like we don't know.
Mm,
Um,
we
I don't
really
know
have
if he'll
no
be
idea.
Oni. I feel like he'll be very it'll be some very, very augury thing. I don't know what that means, but I almost feel the opposite. I feel like we'll just be impressed by how augurish what he does is.
mm, mm. Um, yeah, I guess we'll have to see. I don't know. We'll have to see. Okay, so yeah, we have three defectors and one loyalist, and then Seth, who has to answer what side is he picking, and he says no. Um, and so Alexander very reasonably decides to take him off the board by forswearing him.
I mean this scene is just
Yep,
like holy shit. Like there's
yep.
so much tension. Theatrics come into it such a powerful way. Obviously, there's like huge fucking stakes. Like this was an enthralling read.
It's good, isn't it? God, it's so good.
Yeah, and this is where we get that line from Seth, where like Alexander is criticizing him for having no ambition, and Seth is like,
Mm,
"If everyone had your kind of ambition, the world would be a bloodbath."
mm.
Which Seth's a piece of shit, and he's like a lazy dickhead. Don't get me wrong, but he's got a point.
Yep, it's fair enough.
He's not wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. Um,
Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, Alexander uses the promises Seth made to his dying grandma to fucking forswear him, and I feel like this is
Mhm.
just like a scenario that's designed to make it clear, like this is evil. What Alexander is doing, like the fact that we chose promises to a dying grandma to
Mm,
use and manipulate like this. For me, I read this and it's harking back to the Fernanda thing. It's like, why did you have that paper and stuff signed and you knew about these promises, Alexander, unless you were keeping them in your back pocket? Like you know what I mean? Like there's such a malintent to the fact that he had this set up at all. Like it was obviously only ever meant to be a last resort, and he has to use it here, but you sort of got to question the kind of person who's building that sort of shit up against their own nephew.
mm. Yeah. Do you though? I mean, in our last bonus material, we got the Kennetiers planning out contingencies for the Kennet others. That was a similar situation of building up contingencies that they honestly hope that they never have to use. Um, that's what Alexander did, and he had to use it. It's sad, but I'm sure he didn't want to have to use it.
You were just determined to die on this hill that Alexander's not the worst, aren't you?
I
Um,
think Alexander's a piece of shit, but his actions are totally justified in the story that we've seen, except for in the Snowdrop Nicolette interlude. After the Nicolette interlude, Alexander has been a absolute nice, kind person.
yeah, I guess the argument I would make against it, the comparison, I think the comparison to what the Kennetys are doing with the Kennet others is actually a really interesting point.
Mm,
Like I really like that argument. I think I would argue against it by saying it's different because Alexander was the one in power, and he didn't actually do anything to actively help Seth be better. He just presented him with opportunities. Like he could have held this promise over his head as a motivator earlier on if he really wanted to be a good person.
mm,
Like the Kennetys are gathering these ways to bind their friends, but it's sort of like, oh, we hate this, and we're going to seek permission before we use it.
mm,
Alexander shows no like, oh, I hated that I had to do this. Like, I guess up to the reader to imply whether how much you want to think he felt this was bad that he had to do.
mm.
But I didn't get the impression he thought it was bad. I just think he thought it was a safety net.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. And maybe the fact that he could have been like, hey, Seth. Well, okay, here's what he says to Seth. He says, before Seth refuses, he says, Seth, I'm prepared to forswear you. And Seth says, yeah, whatever, do it, mate, basically. And then Alexander does it. So it's not like he doesn't, like, he gives him ample outs, right? Which just
I
are
mean,
not
that's
taken.
true. Seth has a point that it's shitty of Alexander to force them onto sides like this, but then also, I guess to be fair to Alexander, he gets Seth to admit that Seth probably would have gone over to Bristow eventually.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
like it's shitty to be forced onto a side. Seth, if you want, you could have said something like, "Oh, I'm actively going to remove myself from this conflict. I'm going to say no. I'm not going to get involved. I'm going to swear that I won't come back to the Blue Heron Institute for 2 months, and then I'll come back. Whatever, right? Like Seth doesn't really do much to put himself in a neutral position, right? Like he says, "Oh, I'll just hang around and do whatever I want," basically. And
I don't
Alexander
know.
gives him. Mm,
I guess sorry to interrupt. I'm just kind of on team Nicolette of like, yes, Seth's the fucking worst and we hate him, but this is still unnecessary. He still doesn't deserve this. Um, like if
mm,
Alexander wanted to, he could have done something less severe. Like all of these options you're saying that Seth could have taken, Alexander I think could have more explicitly offered them. Like I
sure.
don't know.
Sure, maybe you're right. I think uh, I don't know. Again, I don't think Alexander is a saint, but I think he's not acting in an unjustified way, in my opinion. Like he's invested, let's just say, some time and effort into these five apprentices, and three of them are saying to him, "No, I'm going to act against you." And his response has been, "Okay, fine. At least you're telling me fine." And Seth is saying to him, I might stab you in the back, I might not. I'm not going to tell you, and you're going to have to constantly worry about it. And that's just such a slimy, shitty thing to do. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I get. I just think there are better ways to handle it that don't involve forswearing. Which, like, as Nicolette brings up, it's fucking a terrible thing to do.
It
You
is,
should
and
be
maybe
doing
there
that.
are, but I don't know. This is the system we live in. I'm kind of,
Well, righto, Corbin.
yeah, I know, I'm pulling out the Corbyn argument here a bit, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't know. I think change the system, yes. Is this the right time to change the system? I don't know. Maybe not. Change the system when you're not under attack.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, yeah. Well,
Mm,
whatever. I feel like we're going around in circles now,
mm,
but yeah. Um, as a quick aside,
yeah.
I just want to point, like I have been slowly rereading the story as well, and I just got to I think it was like in 2.5. It was the one after Lucy had that big yell at Avery in Verona. Uh, after like the incident with the fairy early in Act
Mm,
2, Verona makes a very similar promise to what Seth did that like she's going to try to be better.
mm,
And I guess that comparison just jumped out to me here because like this is a promise that has come and stabbed Seth in the back, but it's like he made it. Yeah, I guess he wasn't given a framework to actually help him do it. Like I think Alexander constantly talks about how he gave him opportunities, but I don't think anyone was actually encouraging him or putting him in the right mental space to take advantage of them. If anything, Alexander probably was okay with this because this was the option that left him with this power to forswear him.
mm,
Whereas, like, when Verona and Avery make this promise to Lucy that they're going to try to be better, it's like Lucy helps them to do that.
mm. Yeah, fair. Fair
Just a bit
enough.
of a cultural comparison. Like, it's a good thing to make a promise like this if you've got the Kenneteers with your back. Whereas if you're in the Bell and J circle, promising to try and be a better person is apparently a terrible idea.
Well, promising to try and be a better person and not actively doing it, you know.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's more of a statement on how much of a piece of shit Seth is.
Yeah.
But yeah, and props to Nicolette, our public defender, trying her darndest to save, like, I think the person who is objectively the biggest piece of shit in her life.
Yep, she gives it a good shot, doesn't she? Nicolette definitely is a undeniably a good character. She's great. Yeah, she really doesn't have to do this, but she does.
Yeah, she puts more effort into saving Seth than Seth
Than
does.
Seth does, for sure. And again, s- more evidence. Seth is just a piece of shit. Like he doesn't give a shit. I don't know. I mean, I feel a bit bad because I'm starting to think that maybe Seth just has some. like depression or something that is causing him to just be stuck in a rut, and maybe this kind of punitive justice is not necessarily the rehabilitation that he needs.
Yeah, like maybe a comparison to Verona's dad isn't out of the question, as in somebody
Mm,
who's just stuck. And yes, they're hurting the people around them, but like one of the ways you could fix that is by helping them and trying to lift them up. Like,
mm,
we talked about this with Verona's dad, like not from Verona or anything, but he needs help from someone.
mm,
Um, and Seth was maybe the same, but instead he was in this bullshit system where Alexander probably was not actually wanting him to get better if this option was left there. So, um, yeah, he was just kind of let so people let him fall into this position, and yeah, because you're right, he doesn't fight it. Like, there's definitely a sense of he's just willing to give up. He doesn't like his life, and he's happy to let it go.
yeah, which is pretty glum, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm. Um, we also okay. So we'll get to this in a second, I guess. Actually, so yeah, Nicolette does her best, but it doesn't work. Seth gets forsworn, and the gang leaves the office. And Fernanda kind of comes to terms with the new status quo here. Alexander decides to leave the school, and Fernanda stands apart from Layla and all of her previous allies.
I love how after like the intensity and drama of Seth getting forsworn, where like Alexander felt like he was so in control and it was also grandiose. It felt very contrasted to me against this bit. Like Alexander versus Bristow, this conversation they have, it felt so petty. Like
Mm,
Alexander's like, I'm going to leave. This does not mean I cede control. And Bristow's like, but I take it. And then Alexander's like, no, I'm leaving the executive decisions to Raymond. And it's just like, it's that really petty, dumb bullshit of coup and claim. And it's just, yeah, I don't, I guess this stood out to me after the power of that forswearing scene. Alexander to come out and start arguing shitty little semantics with Bristow. I was just like, this is such a pathetic fight. Like, why are we
mm.
doing this?
I'm yeah, no, I had the same vibe. The reason I talked about wanting the Alexander interlude was so that we could feel like we knew what was going on in Alexander's mind. And I still feel like we just have no idea, right?
Yeah, because he's still playing fairly confident. Like he's clearly stressed, but he's still giving us the vibe that he might have something up his sleeve. But I also believe Alexander's the person who would act like that even if he doesn't.
Yes, he would.
Because that is like part of the game. Like if you admit defeat, you're done.
Yeah,
Um,
but I mean, again, he's done nothing, right? He
yeah.
forswore Seth. That's the one thing he's done. He's literally done nothing.
Yeah, well, I'm unclear if forswearing Seth, like, does that help him or like how much?
Yeah, I'm
Um,
assuming gives him a bit of a power boost, but that's it. Like he hasn't used it for anything, right?
yeah. So yeah, I'm undecided. Like, I feel like Alexander is acting like he's got a secret plan, and given he's like a bit of a fortune teller and wise out in the background, like it's possible. But I'm also more than willing to believe he's just acting like that.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'm starting to suspect that Alexander's plan specifically involves the Kennetiers forming a rebellion.
I mean, it could do. I don't know. I'm of the impression that he actually was just overconfident and didn't do enough.
Mm,
Like he didn't realize how bad his position was, and
mm,
he's just been caught off guard by Bristow.
yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe you're right. Oh, we also get a bit of a quick scene where we see what happened with America Ted, which is fun.
Yeah.
Um, it's bullshit, total bullshit. I'm sure we'll get more resolution of that eventually.
Yeah, we talk about it a bit more next chapter, and we'll bring it up. But it's hilarious how just gross her defense of Alexander is, just in a very funny way.
Mm.
It's almost comedic in this very tense chapter.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, once that's over, like we get back to just like the bad feels time because Fernanda comes sort of to the fore again in the text, and I mean, yeah, she sort of notes like, oh, like I didn't explicitly plan on dicking Layla over, but now she's promised to give me lessons, and we're on the opposite side, so she's going to get gainsaid
Hmm.
or something, and wasn't actually my plan, but it worked out very well. Is sort of the vibe she gives off, and it's like she's sort of like, "That's how you need to operate in this world." And, like, Alexander has just kind of completely validated that thinking.
Yep, 100%. Yeah,
Uh,
she's
yeah,
learned. She's learned from the teacher.
yeah, which is like I find Fernanda absolutely terrifying and evil, and also I don't blame her for that at all because it is the world she's grown up in.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Um, I'm sure we will get more of Fernanda, and we will resolve this uh, soon, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's presumably what Arc 7's gonna be all about.
Hmm. Speaking of, shall we jump into it? The first
Yeah.
chapter of Arc 7, Gone Ahead, 7.1. We're in Verona's ahead, and we start off with Bree quickly explaining the forswearing and what's happened and why none of the senior students are around, basically.
Yeah, it's basically like, I feel like the opening of this chapter is just Wildbow through Bree kind of running us through. So just in case you had any hope, like, none of the senior students are here to help. Y is away. I think the closest thing they have to help is that Eloise is off in the wind, and
Mm,
apparently she's, like, the biggest threat, so she's kind of taking up a lot of their mental energy by not being a known factor.
yes.
Um, and, maybe the other interesting wrinkle in all of this is Durashay.
Mm,
um, like, Ray is clearly being the bad kind of neutral, which is
mm,
why Zed has, like, fucked off. Um, but Durashay, we seem unsure exactly what kind of neutral she's being.
mm.
Um, I honestly don't really have any confident guesses.
Yeah, she's a real wrinkle, isn't she? I'm about 70% sure that she's just going to do nothing until we have the new headmaster, but she could really just do anything, right?
Yeah, I guess I do kinda get the impression if we think about what she was talking about in her binding class,
Mm,
there was so much of that stuff of, like, social binding, like, she viewed everything as binding, and, she has this focus on very non-human others and, like, powers. So maybe she just has absolutely 0 interest in this bullshit, like, she views it as she'd view getting drawn in as some kind of binding, and she's not interested in human politics because 'cause they're not, like, fucking dinosaur monster beings or whatever the fuck.
mm.
Um, yeah, so maybe it's just that. Maybe she's kind of this neutral of just refusing to get involved because it doesn't interest her.
Yeah, I mean, but I feel very short sighted of her. I feel like if she's genuinely invested in this school, at least somewhat, like the Bristow headmastery is going to be so different to the Alexander one. I don't know. Hmm,
On
yeah.
the other hand, her reputation is apparently like worldwide famous, so she probably has a bit of safety there in that like she's a big draw for the school, regardless of who the headmaster is.
Mm.
So they're kind of inclined to just keep her appeased, and if that means letting her stay out of it, that I mean, honestly, given the kind of shit she summons, just might actually be in everyone's favor for her to be not involved.
True, true. Oh God, I'm. It's crazy to me that we're, an arc into this Bristow Alexander conflict, and I still feel like I have absolutely no idea how it's going to end.
Yeah, yeah, same.
Um, okay. S- so yeah, the fact that as we get a bit more Bree stuff, we see a bit more of the Hungry Choir kids basically coming out sometimes to punctuate her sentences, and this is so creepy. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of excited to see what it looks like if Bree gets into a fight because I half expect that she will basically fight by throwing ghost children at people, and I'm so excited to see that. I mean, I know in this chapter she says, "Oh, it's best if I stay out of the conflict," which yes, fair, but man, if it happens, I want to see her just chuck some children at people.
Yeah, a bit easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
I think yeah, because that's interesting. It is like a bit of a chunk of this part of the chapter is like her describing how they think she might be able to use that power, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. And the fact that these kids sort of keep popping out of her with more and more frequency, it's starting to feel like a bit of a Chekhov's gun.
Mm,
Um, like getting a whole speech on, yeah, there's probably some way to use the Hungry Choir's power, but we haven't figured it out. And then yeah, kids popping out everywhere. It's like yeah, it's gonna go off at some point, I hope, and I
mm,
hope she's okay.
yeah. Me too. Yeah, I do half expect that we'll see her in some sort of conflict, and I'm dreading it. We'll
It's
have to
it's
see.
interesting how she compares to Matthew. Sorry, I just sort of had this thought. Like
Mm,
Matthew took on this doom and then seemingly had no support network and kind of succumbed to it and is now
mm,
got it trapped inside him, but like it's seriously hurting his ability to practice or whatever. Whereas like Bree has the hungry choir in her, but she's getting all this support, Civil War aside. Um and she's getting these opportunities to try out different things with the hungry choir and like see how it will adapt to the binding and like oh, we can like learn how I could channel it. Whereas like Matt never had any of those options, I don't think. He just kind of was left to suffer.
mm. Yeah, interesting distinction between them. I guess we can kind of see Bree as the example of what happens when something like Matthew happens, but with a support network, right? What does that look
Yeah.
like? I wonder if we'll see any more distinctions between them that we think come out that we need to kind of pay attention to that give us any insight into either Bree or Matthew's characters.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Mm. Um, so yeah, we finally get what you've been looking for ages, Elliot. Talos begins to explain who are the Oni and what are the Oni.
I mean, the bit where it looked like it was gonna go nowhere again, I was fucking livid. Like, there's a part where
Hmm.
they start and then somebody comes in, they get distracted, and I was like, "You
Not
can't do
again.
this
Yeah.
again." And luckily, Verona was thinking the same thing because she basically did exactly what I did in my living room, which was put her foot down and be like, "No, we're
No
doing
way.
this
Not
right the
again.
fuck now."
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Wabo put this in just for you, Elliot, because Verona has had the exact same thought you've had, which is that the universe seems to discourage the spread of information about what Oni are.
Yeah, which makes sense. Honestly, like if they're the anti-practice, it makes sense that the
Yeah.
systemic practice would kind of,
There's some
uh,
suppression of that information.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it was I was on the like a Parahumans Discord earlier this week, like chatting to people in the Pale channel, and I think it was like Side or someone who pointed out that this was actually the third instance of the Oni coming up like this. Like it was a good thing Verona did this now because this was the third attempt of
Yeah.
someone to explain the Oni before it got like distracted.
This is the time when it gets especially important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, obviously, I feel like this is gonna be crazy important, specifically for this arc and just for the story as a whole.
Mm.
Um, we're probably gonna spend a while here. I've written a lot. I'm just sort of realizing. Um, like, because for starters, I feel like the Oni history really just reinforces how bullshit this idea that the status quo just like
Mm.
is like. I mean,
Mm.
obviously, I'm maybe jumping ahead, but like Corbin, because Corbin's going to bring up this argument later, but like Talos literally explains that actually things were, for the most part, better for others over there. Like
Yeah.
in general, it was like they were quite well accepted and they could move in and around and like work with or around humans quite easily. And it was just this minority of practitioner families who fucking escalated things and took it like way too far.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this Oni stuff is great. I've kind of been, I haven't been fully jumping into it with you when you've been talking about how it's strange that we keep missing it, but this really reaffirms how much this Oni stuff matters because it so effectively ties into the thematic, oh, I guess just themes, the thematic themes that we've been seeing in this story, right? Like it's a perfect way to represent in the other verse these ideas of balance and power of practitioners over others and rebuilding the system and what does that look like and what happens when the others try to do that and even an extension if we're taking this fully out into commentary on the real world, it's the Oni are effectively what happens if somebody within a underclass to put it bluntly tries to rebel and change the system when they're not really a powerful majority. They're a social minority and a minority in terms of power, right? Like
Mm.
they just don't have enough power to actively rebel and change the system. And so maybe we need something that has practitioners a bit more on board. Maybe that's Kennet. Maybe it's something. But I love how well this ties into the themes of the story.
Yeah, like because the way Talos explains it, it's basically like just straight up like yeah, so they were more integrated into society.
Yeah.
Then the practitioners started like abusing them more and more, And so then they did this, like, and this is the thing that really gets me, is like it's framed as this sort of violent rebellion.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about that because what the Oni did is they just resisted labels and made
Yeah.
themselves like less categorical. Like, I would assume if they were actually actively attacking people, Callis and Corbin would have brought that up, but they don't. What they say is, oh, they made it harder for us to enslave them by breaking the categories. So it's like, oh, it was like, yes, it was violent for the practitioners, but only if you tried to enslave them, which is just like
Yeah.
it's not aggressive. It's sending this message of, hey, if you try to hurt us, you'll get hurt back. So maybe don't.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very defensive, right? Like all they really tried to do is defy labels, and that seems to be basically the key component of an Oni is that when you check the form for what type of other are you, they're the other. They don't fit into any box. And that's such a like it doesn't seem like they're doing it so that they can be better at hunting down and killing practitioners. Maybe that's what some of them do, but at first it seems like it's just a reaction. It's just a no, we don't want to get bound. Please stop.
Yeah. Well, I think the way Talos phrases it is he says, this made it dangerous to practice. And the previous fact that he's established for us is that practice over there meant aggressively binding others into objects.
Mm,
So it's like the reason it was dangerous was because the practitioners there were like trying to catch them and put them in objects, and their changing of the categories made that dangerous to do. It's just like, yeah, like I would even argue against that being considered a violent form of rebellion because it's actually defensive.
mm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, the Oni are pretty interesting, aren't they? They're an interesting group.
yeah. I mean, as like a just a fun world building note, I love how this is manifest as like the Oni are anti-practice. Like they sort of literally play into the element of surprise, and they drift away from repetition. Like it's the opposite of all the other practices in that Oni magic sort of plays off subverting expectation and patterns rather than leaning into them.
Mm.
It's going to make them very fun to have in the story now. Like, we've got some Oni practitioners on side, and I can't wait to see what unexpected, crazy bullshit they pull.
Yeah, what crazy bag of tricks they have access to.
Yeah, because it's like we've spent the last 6 arcs building up the rules of this world, and now Arc Seven's like, hey, here's a bunch of shit that's going to do the exact opposite, and
Yeah.
that's a very fun premise.
Yeah. I love in our notes you've put a bunch of things that are tying together Oni practitioners and the Kennetiers and the overlap between them. I'd love for you to just run through this list because I really want to dive into it, but I want to give you the chance to bring up all the parallels that you noticed as you were writing this out because I think they're great.
Yeah, sorry, this section got so fucking long.
I mean, you've been
Yeah.
waiting for it for a while, right?
Yeah, I went nuts. Um, yeah, I mean, there's like obviously, I feel like there's comparisons to be made, not just like with the Canneteers and the Kennet others and the Oni, but like specifically, like our trio of Oni practitioners that are joining the group are like three mostly wild practitioners, two and a half wild practitioners. Like
Mm,
it's people who found an other and became its patron,
yes.
which seems very intentionally to mimic the Kenneteers.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, like I don't quite know exactly where that's going to go, but I can't wait to find out. Like this idea that we have three other people who have been, yeah, I mean they're going to be the closest thing to the Kenneteers that we've seen, and that's what like everyone says. Oh, we originally thought that you were maybe Oni people, but you weren't quite quirky enough.
Mm,
Um, which I think Verona takes offense to, which I thought was hilarious. Um, yeah, but I mean, like this has to tie into like all the stuff Miss has been thinking and talking about, right? Like this, we've long suspected Miss is maybe attempting something like changing the paradigm. I think that's been our loose theory, and it's like it's hard not to tie that to the Oni because that's what they tried to do. Like, is this
mm.
how different is what Miss is trying to what the Oni tried?
Yeah. 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 Um, can you pull out the two quotes? I just love these quotes that you pulled out.
Okay. Um. So okay, yeah. Well, so one of the ones is I think it's Talos is explaining it. He says we rely on truth, and the Oni used the rule of discourse to shape their language. So every other in an area would agree to accept that every third statement from a powerful other would be false, and so that kind of made it acceptable for the others to lie all of a
To lie
sudden.
every third statement. Yeah.
And like, I mean, all I could think when I read that was, hey, what if you had an area, say a town that was functioning as a hollow, and you had all the others in the area already forming an alliance? They could probably agree to all sorts of weird shit.
Yeah, I mean, we already know that, for example, Toadswallow is making all the goblins agree to some set of rules, right? Like, maybe that set of rules includes one that says Toadswallow, every 10th statement from him can be a lie, you know? Like,
Yeah, well, we never got that third
yep,
like rule
yep,
from that chapter, so maybe it ties into that. Like I don't know if it'll specifically be a rule of discourse because I don't think
yes.
Wildbow would be kind enough to give us that direct a clue. So I'm almost like trying to take this step back and think like what are the other rules of this world that we've accepted as fact that maybe aren't fact in Kennet?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It just it boggles the mind. We've kind of got hints of that. I mean, that idea has been seeded with Snowdrop. The fact that others who have rules can stick to their rules, even if their rules kind of, are exceptions to the overarching rules. So hearing this again is kind of like, oh, is this something?
Yeah, yeah. And then yeah, obviously like the other sort of quote that links the Kenneteers to and the Kennet to the Oni is this one where Talos again says they worked with practitioners, but they pick out the people who are far from traditional family, as far from traditional families as they could get, and make them into others, or get them to make complex cursed items, or teach them tricks to make them assassins specializing in countering practitioners. Which, again, not really a super aggressive move from the Oni. Like, first of all, recruiting people to be practitioners who are the opposite of the people who are like enslaving you and binding you to objects,
Yep,
hard to argue. Uh,
yep. Seems pretty neutral to positive to me.
yeah, arguably the aggressive part of this is turning them into
Turning them into
assassins
assassins. Yeah.
specializing, but yeah, like whatever. But again, like that just feels like it relates to the Kenneteers. Like they've been picked up by these
Yeah.
others.
Picked out the people who are as far from traditional families as possible, make them into others. I mean, almost explicitly, Miss has said this was something we were thinking about doing, right?
Well, I think it was Marisica who said the three
Right.
of them were picked
Yes.
because they were already turning a bit other.
Yes. I mean, the parallels here are crazy. I love it. I love that. I don't think it's the Kennet others are secretly all Oni, right? I don't think it's that strong, but I do think
No,
it's
I,
there's
I,
parallels and there's I don't know, there's lessons to learn, right? Surely.
yeah, like I think whatever Miss was up to is going to relate. Like I think this sort of confirms that Miss probably had some sort of grand plan that was anti the practice,
Mm,
and the Oni are kind of our template for how that can work.
yeah.
And I guess obviously we need to do better this time because it didn't work. I love that part where Lucy brings it up. She's like, "So did it work? Did the Oni get out of that terrible dynamic?" And Talos is like, "Oh, I never looked into that."
What? Right? What in what world?
just didn't even occur to him to like actually, oh, did they win? Like,
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
so what ended up happening? Dunno. Oh god. Yeah, it's crazy. Um so yeah, I want to call out one other thing, which is the main thing about Oni is the, refusal to exist under a single label, right?
Yeah, like
Um
I think they even sort of establish here, Oni isn't like a category of other. It's almost like I think they describe it as a uniform, but I almost see it as an affiliation. Like it's an other sort of taking a stand and saying like, I will not be in one of your categories and bindable. Like I'm going
yeah,
to stand up for myself.
yeah,
Basically, is
exactly.
how I see it.
Yeah, I agree. So I thought about these parallels between Oni and the Kennet others, and another one is how much the Kennet others naturally defy labels, right? Like Toadswallow is a polite goblin, Guillemay is so far a fairly straightforward fae. Miss is like mayor and gardener of this town, but intentionally defies labels. Like they all are a bit paradoxical to an extent, right?
Yeah, yeah. Although, like, it's hard to know how much I want to attribute that to, like, yeah, maybe them trying to be doing stuff similar to the Oni, or how much it's just like I feel like maybe the whole point of this is like that the others. are not as simple. Like practitioners have this tendency to label them and be like, "Oh, all goblins are like this,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're not actually. I keep coming back to like 5.d opened with that little artist goblin
Yeah.
who was kind of this wholesome little artist goblin, and then everyone kept beating him up to the point where he turned into a murderer.
Mm.
Because Toad Swallow told him, "You either kill or be killed."
Yeah.
Um, and it's sort of these are self fulfilling prophecies, and maybe that's all Kennet is. Kennet is a place that doesn't apply the pressures of the labels.
It lets
Kennet is
you
a place that
be what you are.
yeah, like, just lets you be an individual. Like, maybe that's all it is, and that hard to argue against that.
Yeah. 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 Um, yeah. Interesting. I'm now strongly converted to the opinion that we're going to see Oni actively in this story, and it's going to play a role with the parallels to Kennet. But we'll have to get to that later.
Yeah. Well,
So
we've got our 3 boys who are the only practitioners with their Oni in a box.
yes.
Um, yeah, I can't wait to see them in action this arc. I think it's gonna be so fun.
Yeah. Um, Corbin begins explaining why the Oni should have just peacefully protested their oppression and not gone all violent, huh? Not rioted. So Lucy obviously leaves the table rather than getting bogged down in this horrible, nonsensical argument.
Yeah, like, I mean, look, she tries, and yeah, God, I was like yelling at Corbin. On a bit of a lighter note, there's one part of this conversation where Avery says to Corbin, "Shut your talkie hole, Corbin," which is just the most fucking Avery insult I've ever heard in my
Oh, what a
life.
dweeb. What a
Um,
dweeb.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was no accident that Lucy is the one who gets angry and has to leave the table in this because I felt having watching Lucy have this conversation with Corbin took me back to conversations I've had about like Black Lives Matter in the last year.
Mm,
Like, I'm not gonna, I'm not saying that the only thing is Black Lives Matter. Like, it's a sort of broader metaphor than that. But like, I guess I can't help but like make a bit of a comparison between them. Like I think it's a comparison you can make because if we go back to like what the others keep saying about like how practitioners started up when the world was like much smaller, like you can sort of see, okay, humans are spread out around the world. There's not many of them. There are more dangers in the world in the form of others. So we make practitioners and they're meant to sort of police things and make it a bit safer for humans.
mm.
And that idea makes sense then. And then now humanity's spread across the globe, kind of taken it over. There's millions of us, and the practitioners have kind of grown and turned that into oppression of the others because there's more of them. Like there's sort of less dangerous others, so the line of what is something that needs to be challenged has shifted. And it's just like I guess the point that's sort of being made here is we developed this system a very long time ago when it made more sense, but the world has changed and maybe it doesn't make so much sense anymore. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of again where I'm tying it a bit to BLM and just
Mm.
like, I guess this whole idea of like, I feel like some of the others and practitioners in this story are saying, hey, maybe it's ridiculous to build our whole world around some agreement written by a guy thousands of years ago.
Yeah, maybe there are other systems that have been proven to work. Maybe we don't have to hold ourselves to systems that were designed, not even necessarily in good faith, hundreds of years ago, right?
Yeah, just because some guys wrote a constitution that made sense to them 250 years ago and worked back then, doesn't mean you need to treat it as gospel today.
Yeah, and even the phrase "it worked back then" not necessarily true, right?
No,
Like
yeah, like Lucy brings that up.
it,
It's like, well, that
it,
was written by them.
yeah, it worked for the people who it benefited, sure.
I mean, yeah,
um,
exactly.
Yeah, I don't even know what Corbyn is arguing for. Like, have you ever had this? It's a conversation where someone's saying arguments that are like very dog whistle type arguments, right? And if you push them on saying, okay, what are you actually trying to say? What is the point you're trying to make? If you ask that question enough, eventually they have to either give up or drop some genuine racist nugget. And you're
Yeah,
like, you just know that's the seed. And if you keep pushing, you'll get there. But God, it's so exhausting.
yeah, and I think that's why Lucy just checks out. She's like, she says it. She's like, we have more immediate concerns, and I'll
Yep.
sort this shit stain out later. But for
Yeah.
now, I just need to leave, like,
Yeah.
so we can
Yeah.
do what's important right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so I guess to go back, just like because obviously I've just sort of compared the Seal of Solomon to the U.S. Constitution. I brought up BLM. Like, I want to. There was a discussion on the Parahumans Discord that I just want to sort of bring up because I feel like it was really important to understanding some of the disagreements people have had with, like the idea of practitioner oppression or comparing others to like certain disenfranchised groups. Like, I think
Mm,
it, like to say that the others in the story are a straight up metaphor for like a specific minority or something, like I don't think is what the story's doing. I think
yeah.
like to say goblins are oppressed is not saying, oh, goblins are like the equivalent of X minority. It's
Yes.
saying like the way that we group goblins and otherize them and treat them terribly is similar to how we can warp our own perceptions and otherize like groups
Yeah.
that we don't like necessarily know enough about.
Yeah, it's definitely. I don't think it's as uh, specific as trying to make a point about one. You made allusion to BLM, and I think the parallels are there, but because
Yeah,
obviously this is a contemporary work, but I don't think it's specifically we're talking about African American oppression or anything like that. I think it is more general than that, and talking about kind of power systems as a whole, and giving, as Wildbow wants to do, is wanted to do, giving multiple different examples of the ways that these power systems can interact and play off of different situations, and the kind of narrative and emotional impacts that they can have, right?
yeah, like I think BLM is the example I go for because we're doing this podcast in 2020 and it's
Yeah, of
just
course.
the example that's on our minds. There's probably a dozen other like historical movements that you could tie this exact situation to. Like it's not specifically like tying to one group. It's sort of making statements broadly about like how humans can treat other groups of people when they otherize them. That's why they're called others.
I mean, yeah, exactly. They are otherized. They're literally
Yeah.
otherized. Um, yeah, cool.
Sorry, yeah,
So
just wanted to clarify that. Like
yeah,
after
yeah.
making a distinct comparison, I do want to say, but that doesn't mean that that's what I or the story am saying it is. It's just a comparison to highlight what it's saying.
Mm. Um, yeah. So Lucy extracts herself from this conversation, and the gang all take stock, talking about who's on their side, where they all stand, kind of figuring it out, basically.
Yes, and the Kenneteers are really sticking to their like loosey definition of neutrality here that I love, which is because it's kind of every time they sort of like, okay, yeah, let's go stick it to Bristow. Other people in the room are like, yeah, and we'll wait for Alexander to come back and put him back in power. And like Avery and Verona keep having to be like, no, fuck him as well. He's done fucking nothing for any of us.
Mm.
Um, like we owe him nothing. He keeps fucking making us do all the work for him. He does nothing. If we're going to take this school back, then like we're not just going to put him back in charge.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with it. We will touch on the alternate proposal. I guess let's talk about it now. Verona races the idea of Ray being the headmaster, and she makes a point that's like, oh, he might be good specifically because he doesn't want it, which I'm totally all for, but just not for Ray. He's just
Yeah,
not a good candidate for it. Like, he would
yeah.
be so
Close,
hands
close,
off.
but no cigar. I think.
Yeah,
Like with
yeah.
Ray, it's like I agree with your logic of let's pick someone who doesn't want it, but Ray's not your man.
No, yeah. Ray would just be hands off enough that it would be basically his second in command that's in charge effectively, and we're just back to square one then now, right? Um,
Yeah, like Ray, as Lucy brought up when she met him, like Ray doesn't even have his own shit together. You can't put him in charge of the school.
yeah, exactly. um, yeah, yeah. He's not a good candidate, let's just say.
Yeah, and like honestly, the only other teacher that springs to mind is Durashay, and she's like probably not a great choice either.
I feel like she'd be better. I feel like she's an improvement at least, whereas Ray, I think, is not an improvement on Alexander.
I I guess I just think she would almost neglect the position,
Yeah, maybe you're
or
right.
like she's not a people person, kind of explicitly not a people person.
Mm.
She finds the most non-people persons she can to hang out with. Um, yeah, I
Hmm.
don't know.
Maybe it's not a human that should be in charge. Maybe another should be in charge of the
Yeah, put
BHI.
Miss in charge. Fuck, like it'd be great.
Yeah, although that would be all binding lessons cancelled. I mean, but that's not the worst thing in the world, right? I don't know.
Field trip to the Forest Ribbon Trail, everyone.
Yeah. Let's
Um,
learn what it means to be another.
yeah. One of the other things that comes up in this conversation is, um, like how they're sort of talking about all the stuff Bristow's going to do, and one thing they point out is like if two people get in a fight, they both get expelled, but then Bristow, as the kind of acting headmaster, has the jurisdiction to invite the ones on his side back.
Yeah.
So we're really just establishing, like, in case you had any doubts, the rules that are holding the cooperation of this school together are just bullshit.
Mm,
Like, because what you can do is break those rules, but if you do it for the right side, then you get like a presidential pardon, and you just get let back in, and there's no consequences really. Um, it's like whatever legitimacy the rules of this school had, they're like, I mean, they mean nothing by now.
yeah. Um, yeah. It's nothing, right? Like the fact that two people could get in a fight, knowing that they can do that basically with impunity because the person who's not on Team Bristow won't be allowed back. The person who is on Team Bristow will get a pardon and come back. Like yeah, it is bullshit for sure.
Yeah, like I think what we're just seeing here is just like the concept of this school is really the victim here. Like I feel like, we're going to have a bunch of these other students, like the Corbins, being like, oh, we just need to get Bristol out and then things can go back to normal because they were fine before. And it's gonna be people like the Kedeteers being like, no, don't you see it was just broken the whole fucking time? Like
Mm,
if these loopholes existed in the system, like we need to fix them.
mm. Yep. Um, yeah. I don't know. It really doesn't seem like the people who are signing up for Team Bristow or Team Alexander really, anyone except the Kentiers, has a idea that there's a bigger picture here.
Yeah. It's why I can't wait to get onto the 3 Oni practitioners and see what their deal is. Like, where do they
Yeah,
stand on all this?
yeah. They're definitely going to
Surely
be, hopefully, advocates for shaking up the system more fundamentally.
you'd think so based on the fact that they're Oni practitioners. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Um, one last thing from here as well. So the Kenneteers have this moment with Melody, where they convince her to go and make up with Layla after Layla did, that little curse on her.
Mm,
No big deal. Um, but like, 'cause I wanted to bring it up because I think Melody makes a fairly good point that she doesn't feel like she should have to approach Layla. Like Layla's the one who did wrong.
mm,
We have no evidence at this point that Melody actually did anything wrong.
mm,
Um, so I don't think Melody is incorrect to say, I feel like Layla should approach me, but the Kenneteers sort of say, hey, listen, we need to be the bigger people. We need to mend these bridges. Like, we need to be better. If that means you have to do this, like, if you're willing to, I think it's a good idea.
mm.
And I kind of like that sentiment.
Needing to be the bigger people.
Yeah, or being willing to. Like, if Melody goes up there and she's like, "Hey, about what happened," and Layla's like, "It's your fault," then I'd be totally behind Melody being like, "Fuck you," and like, running off.
Mm,
But if her taking that first step leads to the bridge being mended,
mm,
and she's willing to make that step, like, if things weren't bad enough that it prevented her from doing it, like, I think it's probably a good idea to have someone push you to do it.
mm. Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Like, it's obviously not always going to be the case. If Layla had genuinely cursed her or done something terrible, then I wouldn't be saying this. But like, I think they're in that wiggle room where Melody's maybe willing to consider it, and that's where it might be good advice.
Mm, fair enough. Um, So here's my favorite part of the chapter. The Kennetys decide that they are probably going to need help, and they decide let's call in some folks from Kennet. And first up, John, who they summon in, and I'm so glad he's back. I love John. He's the best.
He's just so good, isn't he?
Mm,
Um, I love how he's like immediately useful. Like he just spawns in. He's like, "Yeah, there's augurs watching us because the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up, and I can't hear like bird song."
mm,
And, like, the Kenneteer's like, "Oh, shit, you're right, like, all the background noise has disappeared." That's a good thing to know that augurs have that effect. Like, again, just the versatility of the Kennet others is so powerful. Like, I don't think anything in the textbooks would have led us to believe that John would have anti-augur lessons to teach, but he does.
Mm, yeah. God, it's so good. I love the little tips and tricks that they get from the Kennet others because it feels so weirdly attuned to the world, right? Like all the tricks
Mm.
that they get from practitioner school is like, here's how to dominate this to your will or bend the universe to serve you. Whereas John's tip here is listen to the world around you and you can get hints on whether you're being spied on, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I love that vibe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's so great, and it's just something, yeah, that like I didn't see coming. But it's like I love how useful the Kennet others are. They have all of these useful things that go beyond their stand things. Like to jump ahead a bit, like Toad Swallow coming here helps get Liberty on Sidemore, and like on paper, you don't bring the goblins in to strengthen your alliance. You bring the goblins in to fucking sow chaos. Um, but the Kennet others are more than just their labels, and so like they have all these added benefits.
Mm,
Like they bring more to the table than their category implies.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Um,
Also,
because
Snowdrop finally makes an appearance. I feel like she's been out of the story for a bit, and it's beautiful.
yeah, good to have her come back, rear her head again for sure. Um, so it's not just John though. They decide they'll need more help, and so next up we have the goblins who are kind of birthed through a puddle of mud.
Yeah, Verona has to reach in Toadslaw's case, like into his intestines. Uh, I mean, this is fucking gross. It's so goblin. I loved it.
It's weird, isn't it? I love it. It's just like it's just giving like yanking these goblins out through the mud like you're giving birth, and they kind of intentionally are shitty about it. Like, oh
Like that's goblins things, right? Is they like they kind of have to be difficult about everything, and you sort of see that here. Like you know, Toadswallow makes Verona lift him by his like fucking stomach, um, internally, like
yeah.
his stomach, and she's
And
like, "Why
Verona's
did you
like,
do that?"
yeah. And he
And
basically
he's
just
like,
is like, goblin. Ooh, I'm a goblin.
"Yeah." Well, he basically says, "I thought it'd be funny if you had to do that," and it's like, "Well, yes, you're correct. That was hilarious."
yeah.
Um, but also it's so unnecessarily difficult. Um, I also love the bit like when they summon Nat, she like she pops out and it's like she snarls viciously, and Toadswall yells at her, "Be good," and then she like pauses for a second and then snarls conversationally is how Verona describes it,
Mm-hmm.
which is just like, what does a conversational snarl sound like to you?
Mm. Good question. I don't know. I don't think it's possible.
Exactly. Like I fucking love the goblins.
yeah. I want to call out this interaction between Toadswallow and John. Where Toadswallow is like basically tells him that he prefers John when he's not as tense and is more fatty and fleshy and jiggles, which is ridiculous, but also gives us a good sense of John being tense, which is a fun beat to set for John being. I mean, he's a tense kind of guy, but more tense than usual because he's around practitioners and shit's popping off. Like, I don't know. I hope nothing bad happens to John. We'll see.
Oh, I don't think I could handle it if something bad happened to John. Because he calls it out. They're like, "Oh, you can go. This is stressful." And he's like, "No, even if something happens to me, if I can protect you when it happens, like it's worth it." And I'm just like, everyone here is too good. I can't handle something bad happening.
Mm. We'll see. I also can't imagine.
um, and sorry. Yeah, and so I also want to talk about like the Kennedys sort of have a three-pronged approach to the others that they're getting for help.
Mm.
Uh, they've got physical defense in the form of John.
Mm.
They've got immaterial defense in the form of Alpi with special guest Tash that we'll get to.
Yes.
And then you have the goblins, who I guess as the third prong are just the general fuck shit up, like
Wild
make it,
cards. Yeah.
yeah, live up to our wild practitioner name and
Yep.
summon. Like it's just such a hilarious third thing. Like you get this like, yes, we're protected against the material and the immaterial, and then the third part of our stratagem is just send little chaos gremlins at them to fuck their shit up, so that they're just not stable. Like it's so great. I can't wait to see all three arms of this defense get
yes.
used.
I'm excited to see it. It's going to be great. Good times. Um, so yeah, of course we have Alpi. But the main person that we want to see, Verona's new BFF, is Tashlit, who is here too, which is good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like, Tashlit and Verona is just a friendship I think everyone is, like, immediately standing, after this chapter. Like, it was so fucking adorable the way, like, Verona's excited to see her. They just have the best interaction. Um, I love how, like, everyone is giving Tash this fucking wide berth, and Verona just, like, goes up and starts high-fiving her.
Mm. Their BFF relationship is so much fun. It really is just a bright light of joy, right?
Yeah, well, and because I think, like, this has always been Verona's superpower is, like, she doesn't judge people based on external characteristics. Like,
Mm,
right since we met her meat monster friends, in her site, like, her ability has just always been to accept people for who they are, like, regardless of what they look like, and, like, judge them based on their actions. And it's like, she, like, gets on with Tashlit because, like, she just treats Tashlit normally, and Tashlit's given her no reason not to, so she continues to do it.
mm. Yeah, why wouldn't you? They're great. I love it.
I feel like though we get this little bit where Tashlit doesn't like cats, which feels like Wildbow just making sure we can't feel safe in this friendship. Like there has to be.
Yeah, there's got to be a little bit of concern there.
So I am going to choose to ignore it and think that Tash will just get over it. But yeah, like I do love how it's like this friendship seems so fucking strong, so it's almost just like Wildbow's to back. Okay, but don't get carried away. Like they're not like perfect for each other.
Mm, mm. Yeah, or are they? We'll see. I'm sure they'll be great friends. Nothing will go wrong. Don't worry about it. Ugh, I hate when things go wrong. Okay. So yeah, the group kind of converges, reunites, and heads to the school and prepares for the battle.
Yeah, although I don't think it's going to be a battle. It's just going to be a series of underhanded skirmishes.
Nah, I want a
Um,
big swooping shot, CGI, two crowds meeting on field, Lord of the Rings style.
I mean, it would be nice if we could get it over that quickly, but I don't think it's going to be that clean at all.
No, yeah, I think it's not either.
Um, yeah, like this bit where they're walking to the school and they run into Ted. I love how Ted, who's just some dude, can like stand against all these magical people and creatures and win.
Mm.
Like, I want to believe in Ted so much, but he's just so fucking scary, and he seems to still be on Team Bristow. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see.
Indeed, we will. Yeah, Ted's creepy. So yeah, I just want to discuss two quick reunions. First off, we get John and Bree, who have a small reunion. Have they met? Maybe just a union? I don't know. It's tragic. John is very sad and makes me sad.
Yeah, I mean, because obviously, like, he wants to see if Yolda's in there, and Bree is like, she is, but she can't really talk. And
Yep.
yeah, I mean, because just this whole Yolda thing is crushing, like, emotionally. I mean, I think we talked about it when it was first revealed that it was like Yolda had been turned into the Hungry Choir, but that's just such a horrifying concept. Like, and you can imagine for John, he was forced to kill his one remaining like friend who he'd been protecting because she had a curse they couldn't get rid of.
Mm.
And then to have that fucking spat back at you because it's like, oh yes, she's alive and she's been turned by other people into a monster. And also she's right here, but you can't talk to her. Like that's so fucking tragic.
Oh, it's rough, isn't it? Oh, it's rough.
Um,
Um, yeah,
yeah,
very,
God.
very sad.
Like you can see why he's so defensive of the Kenneteers.
Yep. Um, but yeah, so we get another reunion, which is nicer. It's Liberty and Toad Swallow. What a weird, silly, delightful reunion that is.
Yeah, I mean, she kisses him, which is fucking gross. Even Verona is like, that's gross. And if
Yep.
Verona thinks something's gross, it's fucking gross.
Yep.
Um, yeah, but it's an adorable little moment, isn't it? Like, it was one of those moments where it's like, of course, the Teds know Toad Swallow. Like, fucking, of
Of
course.
course they would. It makes perfect sense. We know Toad Swallow has been used to teach youths about goblins, and of course the Teds would have had to do that, presumably, 10 years ago, whatever.
Hmm.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's it. They march off to battle.
Yeah. and there's no extra material this week, as we already said. Everybody gets a bit of a break, so I guess that's the end of our story coverage section.
Yes, but now let's dive into some of our extra stuff, starting with some predictions that have been made by the community in our Pale Predictor application. Shall we dive into it? Do you have a prediction
Yes.
that someone made that you want to pull out?
Yes, I have a prediction from Cal Subalu, who has latched onto that idea that goblins can turn into weapons and has suggested that Snowdrop's trusty rusty fork is actually cherry pop in weapon form. And
It's
this might be
great.
my favorite prediction that we've got.
Yeah, it's so good. So good.
This is exactly the kind of balance of like crazy tinfoil that's actually very believable that I was hoping we'd get through this system. Like, because we haven't heard from Cherry since they left, which I mean, you wouldn't because she's like a useless piece of shit. But yeah, like, yeah, I'm almost going to be shocked if this is wrong.
Mm. It's so good. It's such a good prediction. I really, really love it. It's the kind of prediction, yeah, you see it and you're just like, well, that's true. That's not even a prediction. That's just somehow you know the truth.
I love this one so much. But what have you brought?
I've brought a prediction by user N86NHB67F.
You can't make it easy for us.
I know, right? So this prediction, I loved because it's. Let me read it out. They basically are talking about how they think Mist has a strong connection to the Oni Wars, and that they basically Kennet is their V2 at making a system like this. And I think this is great because this prediction was made a month ago, Elliot, and I just wanted to pull it out because it's
Wow.
so before we had any of these really overt links in the story. This person was like, yep, the Oni Wars are going to be like another Kennet, and Miss is involved because that's the link, and Kennet is V2 of whatever was kicked off the Oni Wars. I just think great work, N86NHB67F, because it's so on point. I love it. I don't know if it'll be fully true that Miss was directly involved in the Oni Wars, but I think it'll be great.
Yeah, because they sort of bring up, and they're right, that's like, all we knew back then was the Oni fought a war against the practice or something. Like, we didn't know what that meant.
Mm.
So it's a very good pick that, like, we've obviously just spent a huge chunk of today's episode talking about how that relates to Kennet, and this user had picked that up pretty early on.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Great prediction. Both great predictions this week. Loved them.
Yeah.
If you want to leave a prediction, the link to our Pale Predictor form is in the show notes down below. So find it there and leave us a prediction, and it might get read out on the show if we like it.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna commit right now to adding a new category to that by the time this episode's out. I'm gonna add how will the Blue Heron Institute conflict end? Category.
Ooh, I do like this. Yeah, cool.
Get predictions in on how you think this war over the school is going to end.
Cool. Yeah. In the meantime, we also had a discussion question from last week, which was pick a monster or creature from any piece of fiction and explain how you might bind it in Pale. And we got a lot of great answers, as we always tend to do with these more creative writings type questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what answer do you want to pull out first, Ruben?
I want to pull out, what was my favorite one? I mean, they were all so good. Okay, let's start with this one from a user called Tsarwat, who gave two, and I'm going to talk about the first one here, which was they wanted to bind or talk about how you would bind Wild Bow. And this was just a great answer, absolutely packed full of memes. I'm going to read out a segment that I really loved. My favorite answer from any of these discussion questions, my favorite line from the discussion questions. The entire binding would be monochromatic, with white empty space and black markings. This counters ambiguous morality, ambiguous interpretation, and general ambiguousness. It's just great. No allocation of grey morality or anything. Everything's black and white and very, very obvious. And that obviously is the antithesis of Walpo. I love this answer, so full of memes. It was great. 10 out of 10, Tissawat.
Yeah, and then they had like a more serious sort of follow up, didn't they?
Yes, so they also talked about binding the Summoning Dark, which is a thing from Discworld, which I had never encountered in Discworld before, but this was a much more straightforward and good like literary breakdown, but I just loved the meme answer of Wildbow. Good times.
Yeah, I've also pulled out the answer from Landis in 963, who picked these creatures from Destiny called, oh boy, here we go. A Hamkaras. I just realized I've never tried to say that out loud before. Um, and the a Hamkaras take their form based on the desires of those who they're like looking at.
Mm.
And so
Like a
something that
reverse
comes up.
Bogart. I kind of pictured
Yeah,
it as.
yeah. And so basically, one of the things that you can sort of do is like make them look at their own reflection to reveal what they're actually sort of thinking. And Landis turned this around into like part of a positive binding where you're sort of saying if they're associated with desires, like I think they also grant wishes or something. So they're very desire associated. So it's like surrounding them with mirrors so they have to look at themselves is forcing their own concepts of desire on them. And then Landis listed a bunch of like desire related objects you can include, like money. Um, I assume they probably said a PS5 because that's what everybody wants these days. Um, and yeah, then you sort of use those to create a positive binding that focuses on this thing's own desires as much as the concept of desire, which was the spin I really liked.
Mm. Um, yeah, 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 good stuff.
I also love the one from Bavarian Barbarian
Hmm.
who did Pennywise from It. Um, Mostly because my favorite part of this was Bavarian Barbarian basically opens the answer by talking about how to use like kids as bait to get Pennywise to come out, which was like 10 out of 10. That's a very practitionery way of approaching the problem. I love it.
Yeah, children as bait, 100%. It started with like you need to get a bunch of children and put them in danger. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, I really liked. I guess I don't know if this is like spoilers if you're enjoying the Kingslinger podcast or diving into Stephen King stuff. Maybe this is spoilers, but um, it's scared of turtles apparently, so
Mm.
you can throw green shells at it like in Mario Kart, and that'll take care of it. I thought that was quite good.
Yeah, yeah. We got a bunch of answers from Beard of Valor.
Yeah, Beard of Valor went ham on these. Hey,
I really liked the one on Ridley from Metroid, mostly because it was one of the few examples from all these answers that I'd actually heard of before coming into the answer.
yeah,
Um, there's a lot here. Like this one's quite hard to summarize, but it was really in depth and fun. So go check it out. As Beard of Valor kind of talks about how you would tame like a fire breathing semi mechanical cyborg dragon.
yep. Beard of Valor also did two that I really liked because they were, apart from these two, no one else did like, well, and I guess Wildbow from Tiso One. No one did humans. Like, how would you bind a human, right? And um, Beard of Valor talked about Harry Potter from obviously Harry Potter and Lyra, the protagonist of the his Dark Materials trilogy. And I liked both of these because it was diving into it in a way that's how do you obviously humans are humans, they don't necessarily have like really strong thematic links, but these characters that are protagonists from stories do have these kinds of very overt themes and flaws and weaknesses and strengths and all that stuff. And I thought that made for really interesting bindings because you're thinking about like what are the behaviors of this character that would allow you to trap them or trick them. The Lyra one I really loved. The Harry Potter one, pretty simple. All you need to do is do some very basic trickery with putting a fake coin in front of a manhole and then fall down it because Harry Potter's a fucking idiot. But yeah, I thought these were great answers.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel like that is a bit of a statement again on the way that the people in this story treat the others. Because it's
Yes.
like as you said, when we know these main characters from the books, they have their own themes and imagery that you can tie into, and that's probably true of most people. You just need to know them, and the thing about others is because of the way the world treats them, there's a lot of this imagery that's assumed by default. Um, yeah. Anyway, sorry. And the last answer I wanted to call out was from Stuck in Reddit Factory, who,
Mhm.
surprising no one who knows them, chose the worst Pokemon, Charmander.
Okay,
Um,
whatever.
I I don't know how many times I have to have this argument with Stuck in Reddit Factory, but
Mhm.
Charmander is a trash Pokemon, and
I would
um,
just like to make clear that these are the opinions of Elliot specifically and don't represent the opinions of Power Reflections as a show. Charmander's an okay Pokemon. It's middle tier. All right. It's fine. Whatever.
Yeah. Obviously this is an ongoing feud. Stuck in Reddit Factory and I have been having on our Discord. But I do have to say this is this was a very fun write up. I think the way Stuck in Reddit Factory wrote this up was very good. Like they use academic references to Pokemon Snap when they're talking about like the sociological behaviors of Charmander groups and stuff. There's references to what sort of PPE you need to wear. Like it definitely worth going and finding and reading. It's a very fun answer, despite being about Charmander.
Yeah, it was good stuff. Yeah, I liked it. Interestingly, Stuck in Reddit Factory didn't comment on the in-universe way that you bind Pokemon, which is by catching them in a ball. Presumably, would be some part of the binding. But yeah,
I mean, well, we got that person in was it the implement text who binds others in cards, like basically had Pokemon card or Yu-Gi-Oh card
Yu-Gi-Oh
collection.
cards was the vibe. Yeah, true.
Yeah,
True.
So is there somebody out there like
Binding
I don't know if
Charmanders into their foil whatevers.
Yeah, or like because there was that monster collecting game that the Kenneteers gave John in Arc 2. So whatever that game's equivalent of a Pokeball is there some practitioner out there who fucking makes little prop Pokeballs and then makes them real?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Be a cool specialty for a practitioner.
I suppose you just make Master Balls. You wouldn't bother making Pokeballs.
Yeah, why would you make ones that have less success rate? Although, potentially, if you only make one Master Ball, you can then imbue it with this is the really, really special one, so it has a much better chance of working,
Yeah, you're right. You wouldn't want to dilute. Like, it probably costs a lot of power. You put it in, and then you go and find a god, and you capture an actual god with it.
Yes, and then you can do anything you want. Although in Pokemon, they never really do. You catch Arceus, and you're just like, all right, I'll use you to go, beat this guy from my hometown, not rejig the world in my image, or whatever.
I could fix world hunger, or we could go fight that kid who bullied me when I was 11.
Or I could go home and spend the night with my mom and then go ride a bike through a tall grass and use you to, squish some bugs that I see.
Put you in daycare.
Yeah. Pokemon, what a silly franchise.
Anyway,
and with that,
enough about our Pale Kibon fanfic.
Yeah.
I think that's everything.
Yeah, that's the end of our episode. The last episode of Cutting Class. Thanks for joining us for it. If you want to leave your thoughts or your predictions, you can do so by going to our Pale Predictor form. There's a link below. Or if you just want to leave your thoughts on the episode or this show in general, you can do so by going to our discussion threads, which again are linked in the show notes.
Yes. We also have a Twitter, which is where the live reads happen, and also where you can get updates on episodes being late, like this one was. So it's the place to stay up to date on things. By the time this episode's out, so if you're listening to this, I probably just finished my live read of 7.2. Or if you're behind, I probably finished it a long time ago.
If you were thinking, hey, how come this episode was late? My response to that is, go on the Twitter, and then you'll know. If you want more from the Duff Media Network, you can go to duffmedia.com, where you can find all of the great shows on the Duff Media Network. What's your favorite Duff show at the moment, Elliot?
It is eternally What You Say.
I know, right?
Obviously.
I feel bad because that's always the answer, but it's just such a fun show.
I am, though, perhaps selfishly, very excited for next week's Game Club. So about a week after this comes out, we'll be meeting with the Game Club to talk about Dark Souls, which you and I have both played for the first time this month.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be hopefully, it's either going to be really good or really bad. So either way,
I think it'll be a great discussion because it's definitely had a lot of interesting. It's been the game that we have within the Discord had the most discussion on, and I think it's going to be a great show as a result.
It's such a mixed bag. It's going to be really fun to dive into this with everyone.
It's a game that I think somebody could make the argument that it was either the best game ever or the worst game ever, and I'd have to be like, you know what? I can see why you think that. I can agree with your points.
You know what's weird? I think I'm going to be doing both.
Yeah, I know, right? If you want to check that out, obviously check out the Game Club next week. If you want access to the Discord where you can talk about games as they're in progress, you can get access to that by going to the Patreon, patreon.com/doofmedia. At the lowest Patreon level, really a steal, you can get access to the Discord.
Yeah, you also get to vote in things like the game club and the book club, so you can
Yes.
decide what game and book everyone gets to talk about.
Yeah.
It's a great perk. And speaking of Patreons, don't forget to head over to patreon.com/wildbow, because he wrote this story, and apparently some of our users and listeners are trying to bind him. So you got to throw him money so he can defend himself.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Cool. Go do it. And I guess that's the end of the show. So we'll see you next time. Pew pew.